Hi everyone, this is your host Peter Finger. Before we dive into today's episode, I have a special announcement. Mark your calendars for the 2025 Fall Wellness Summit, happening on October 18th at 9 a.m. Pacific. This is our final summit of the year and it's completely free. We're bringing together 4 leading heart-centered hypnotherapy experts who will reveal powerful integrative approaches to transform your practice and deepen your impact. Our experts will be covering a variety of topics including rewiring self-worth and identity at a subconscious level, awakening the body's natural healing capacity, supporting nervous system regulation for lasting change, and harnessing sound and frequency for profound transformation. This is your chance to learn directly from the founders of the Wellness Institute, connect with top professionals in the field, and network with a vibrant community of wellness practitioners. Don't miss the final summit of 2025. Register for free at triadhq.com/WSS. We look forward to seeing you there. Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon, and today I'm joined by returning guest, Dr. Jeanne Michele. Jeanne is a trailblazer in personal development, combining over 2 decades of expertise in teaching, modern philosophy, and coaching to empower individuals, couples, and leaders to turn their deepest aspirations into reality. Known for her innovative approach, Dr. Michele helps clients navigate complex relational challenges and everyday struggles, offering fresh, transformative perspectives beyond traditional methods. Holding a PhD in psychology and a master's in spiritual psychology, she is dedicated to guiding people through life's toughest challenges. Last October, she released her debut book, The Infidelity Cure: How to Rebuild Your Life and Relationship After Your Affair, a transformative guide for individuals and couples looking to heal and strengthen their relationships. If you would like to hear more about male infidelity, I encourage our listeners to go back to an earlier episode with host Dr. Graham Taylor, where they had an amazing conversation around betrayal, rebuilding trust, and loving courageously. For our time today, we're excited to welcome Jeanne back on our show to explore how curiosity can replace judgment in relationships, particularly after betrayal, helping couples uncover deeper emotional needs, foster understanding, and create a path to healing by shifting from blame to compassion, while emphasizing the importance of open-ended questions, courageous conversations, and self-awareness in rebuilding trust and connection. Welcome back to the show, Jeanne. It's so nice to have you on.
Sharlee, I'm really happy to be here with you.
Awesome. Thank you. So Jeanne, I just want to jump right in and build upon your last conversation with Graham. You guys discussed the complexities of male infidelity and how deep blame and disconnection can really impact relationships. How does curiosity shift that conversation from blame to understanding in these situations?
So one thing, Sharlee, I think is really important. The curiosity questions are really important. And I think it's beginning with a what instead of a why. Like instead of why did you do that? It's like, what was going on inside of you that prompted you to go down this road instead of coming and talking to me? So being curious about the other person and what's going on inside. And having said that, it's also important to note that when an infidelity experience is first discovered, there's going to be a lot of pain and a lot of upset. And going into these questions in a more diplomatic way probably comes a little later in the process. It's hard to be diplomatic when you're in a state of pain and hurt.
Absolutely.
And part of, working through the infidelity is that the partner who's experienced the betrayal needs to have a big space held for them by the person who betrayed. So you need to be able to go into the I'm hurting right now and not defend or go into judgment. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And one of the things as I was listening to the conversation with you and Graham, I'm like, it makes sense that you wouldn't want to, why did you do this? I need all of the details. But at the same time, like you mentioned at the beginning, are you even able to think that critically about it instead of just saying, I'm really mad at you? Like, I'm hurt. Like, why did you do this to me? Like, how do you get
Yes.
past that step?
I think to recognize it at the beginning, it's pretty darn raw. They're going to be raw. And if you're the one who has betrayed again, you need to hold the space for the other person to be upset with you. They're not going to say it in the best manner possible. And that's okay. That's part of the healing because you have to get through the initial rawness to get to the place where you're looking inside and you're curious as to what's going on inside of you as well as what's going on with your partner. But at the beginning, it's raw. It's raw. And couples have to sit there and they have to talk to one another and be able to express the pain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then how do couples get to that point where you've discussed the things? Like what types of questions should couples ask each other or just in that very beginning stages when it is so raw, like how do you talk through that level of emotion with someone?
Yeah, no, I hear you. At the beginning, it's really about respectful listening. Infidelity gets discovered in a variety of ways. So when infidelity first hits, there is an initial shock and it is going into that place of saying how you feel. Like if you're the one that's been betrayed, I am so hurt. I cannot believe this is happening. Oh my gosh, I do not understand. Okay. And the other person is doing a lot of I'm sorries. I am really, really sorry. There's some things that I need to own. I take 100% responsibility for what happened. And I really need to look inside of myself too and figure some things out. And I hope we can work on this together. So it really is about if you're the one that's betrayed, again, holding that space and also being able to apologize, take responsibility, and create an open dialogue where you don't defend, where you mostly listen. So as the pain gets expressed, and if the connection that they had, if there's some rootedness there, like they've been married for a while, they really feel like they love each other, they both are upset, but they would like to work on it, then you've got something to hold on to and anchor into as they're moving forward. And then it helps to, read a book like The Infidelity Cure, look at the sections. I have a section for men and a section for women to do some journaling, to do some prompting. So you think of some things on your own and then continue walking down the road. It helps to work with somebody too, because working through infidelity is hard. It's difficult and a lot of emotions are going to come up. But then it's getting to the point where you're curious with yourself too. A lot of times I find in male infidelity that women need to take a look at themselves and say, where was I not setting good boundaries with my spouse? Where was I silent when I should have been speaking up about things that were bothering me? Where have we gone on autopilot? So the couple each starting to look at those things that were going on inside of themselves that created a disconnect somewhere along the line. And that is also a part of moving more into being able to ask more curious questions, again, to yourself as well as to your spouse. That leads to greater connection. When anytime a couple or anyone is faced with something that really hits hard, it's an opportunity for them to be able to take a deeper look at themselves and what was going on that they were not paying attention to, and infidelity is no different.
Got you. So you mentioned that being able to ask really good open-ended questions and being more curious of each other will help lead to more deeper emotional needs and establishing those patterns. So what are some of those most common questions that couples should ask of each other and maybe even of themselves to be able to discover what those patterns are?
I think if you are the person who's been betrayed, one of the things that is going to come up are ruminating thoughts. You keep thinking about it and you have trouble letting it go. And I think to help work through that, it's like, where am I feeling this pain inside of my body? What is going on inside of me? You have to get in touch with your feelings and you have to give them a voice. And sometimes it's doing some journaling. Sometimes it's It can be, what was I ignoring and not paying attention to that really is important to me? Where was I not setting boundaries for myself? Where was I not speaking up? Where was I silent in this relationship? So it involves really taking a step back and focusing not only on the betrayal itself, but what was going on in the connection between you and your partner that was a little bit off. Life tends to go on autopilot, especially if people have kids and soccer practice and all of the things that go with raising kids. And before you know it, you're not spending as much time together as a couple, and it makes you more vulnerable to outside influences. Now, I say that not by way of giving someone an excuse, for sure, because the person who betrayed takes full responsibility for their betrayal. That's part of recovery. But there are things that make you more vulnerable. And if you're the one that was the betrayer, for you to take a look and say, what was going on in my life that was causing me stress or that I wasn't paying attention to? What caused me to not talk to my spouse about this before leaning into someone else? And for each person to say, what was I afraid of? Because there's some fear associated with not coming together and talking about things. And, as you probably know, in your practice as well, I mean, it's much easier to talk about things before something like betrayal happens, before some big blow up in your relationship, than it is afterwards.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. And even taking that a step further, you mentioned in the conversation with Graham that those conversations may look different if the couple was already struggling deeply before this happened. Talk to me a bit more about what that curiosity looks like if there were already issues that were in place before the betrayal happened.
Well, I think it's really important. You have to go back to what was going on in the connection before the betrayal. And it takes a little bit to get there, because if someone is really raw, like I have someone in particular, a woman that's like, I don't even want to talk about that. He hurt me, and I think he really needs to make sure that he apologizes, makes amends, and didn't even want to go back and talk about things before the affair. So you have to deal with what's in front of you at the time and work through making some amends around that. And then ultimately, okay, I will say, in order to heal, we really need to make sure we shore up those cracks that you had in your connection before the affair, because our goal is to make your relationship stronger. I know right now at the beginning, you may think that's impossible, but that's where we're headed. Okay. We want you to be stronger than you were. We're not going back to what you had. Okay. We're moving forward. So it takes a willingness on both people's part to say, okay, I'm willing to look at what was going on before. And if they have a little bit of a challenge, like we were talking about, or if they've had the relationship was struggling to begin with, then we look at things like communication styles. Some people, as you can probably tell by talking to me, are fast processors, because I tend to talk fast and move fast. I think you do too.
Yeah.
And some people are much more slower and thoughtful and need many more details. Typically, your partner's with the opposite. So one person has to figure out how to slow down a little bit, and the other person needs to figure out how to, be able to provide more detail than they would need in order to create a solution. So it's being able to look at, it's kind of relationship 101. No one ever taught us how to be in relationship. Nope. So we have to take a step back and look at, what does a good relationship look like? Most of us did not have good modeling, or we had inconsistent modeling. And so part of it's education. You have to be willing to take a step back and say, okay, and you look at a little bit about what was going on in your life as you're growing up. What was it like when I was growing up with my parents? What were my parents' relationships like? And both parties take a look at that. So there's some prompts and some questions to help them dive deeper into, this willingness to take a look. And ultimately, even though the betrayer needs to take 100% responsibility for what happened, the partner who has been betrayed also needs to participate in the healing, because ultimately, if they are unwilling to do that, it absolutely will not work. It's not your fault if you were betrayed, but in order to heal, you need to be an active participant.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that you mentioned that, because a lot of times I've spoken with friends and they're like, well, he did this and he's all wrong. And they didn't necessarily take any chance to look at what was going wrong with their relationship prior to any level of betrayal, what conversations were not had, what things were avoided within the relationship. So being able to, both of you accepting that there is work to be done on both sides of the situation, it seems to be the most helpful for everyone involved.
Yeah, you have to. You can't heal without both people looking at where, again, I think I find with women a lot, it's where was I silent and where was I not setting boundaries?
Absolutely.
Those come up a lot. And a lot of times this gives a woman, who may have been more silent, permission to talk about things, not that she necessarily needs permission, but it
Right.
gives them a more active voice, because in that moment, they are really so upset about what happened that they tend to come out stronger. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes absolute sense, because now, like you said, that permission, whether you should have had it or needed it or not, it gives that, now is that time for you to say the things that you didn't
Right.
say.
Right, right. And that is absolutely a part of the healing, because as I said, you're creating a new relationship. Now it's based on a foundation that you've had, both the
Mhm.
good and the bad, but
Right.
but you are creating together collaboratively something new. And that's again where the healing takes place. So you're looking at relationship. What's your communication style? What's your attachment style? You can get into that too. Some people are more anxious, some people are avoidant. Get to the place where it's like, when I have something that I want to share with you, you go into the other room or you ignore me. So people have to learn to sit face to face with one person being the listener, it's active listening, and the other person, speaking authentically, not critically. I say, how can you turn a complaint into a request? So complain, complain, complain. Well, what do you really want here? And it involves taking a step back and thinking about, what do I want? And even that goes to the one who's been betrayed as well, because sometimes at the beginning, especially, they want to know everything. I want every little detail. And then I say to the person who's been betrayed, think about what you're really looking for here and what you're prepared to hear and know. Make a
Mm.
conscious and mindful choice when you're asking a question,
Yeah.
because otherwise you may hear some things that are so distressing to you, or, are you trying to hurt your partner? Sometimes questions come from that. I really want them to feel my pain and they go at it. Okay,
Mhm.
it's understandable, but why don't we pause here and get to the root of what you really need? I think that's critical for both people. What do you each need right now?
Absolutely. So it honestly seems like it takes a certain level of self-awareness to be able to even have those types of conversations, to have that level of curiosity that you just made a point on. What I was going to ask about is that level of, I want to hurt them because they hurt me. But to be able to see past that, it seems like it takes a certain level of self-awareness to really be able to address your needs and your concerns, and even attack those patterns that you had negatively in your relationship. Would you then suggest that partners seek individual therapy on top of the work around the betrayal? Like, how does that work for you to be able to really understand yourself enough to be able to share that with someone else?
I hear you. So there's several options. A lot of times if somebody is already in individual therapy, that's great. So a lot of times when I'm working with a couple, I will sometimes see someone individually and sometimes see them as a couple, because you
Okay.
need both pieces of the work. It depends on how deep each one needs the individual work, but absolutely you need to be able to take a good look at yourself. And yes, in answer to your question, yes, you really do need both. You need time to explore. And the difference between, working with someone as an individual, working with a couple, I tell them when I'm working with you as an individual, you could throw up all over the room. It's fine. You can say whatever. But when we're working together as couples, we have to navigate how you talk to one another. It's not okay to say some of the things that you might say in an individual session when you're in a couple session. But you need a place to be able to throw out all the F-bombs and everything that you need. Not that you can't say that in a couple session, but to be able to just throw it all out there and be able to express your feelings, your anger, your emotions. And then when you're together, it is expressing your feelings, but not in a way that you're coming at your partner.
Right. Yeah. And as a truth moment, I've been in both individual therapy and in couples therapy, and I completely agree with you. I say some things in individual therapy that I would not, well, I say it in couples counseling, but I don't necessarily say it the way that I say it to my individual therapist. Because again, I vomit all the things. I just say it. However, it
You
comes
vomit
out.
whether there's anybody else in the room or
It's
not.
like, here it is. This is what I need you to know. Now, how do I say this? How do I navigate this with another person? Because I don't want to hurt him. But I need to be able to say these things and be authentic in how I feel and sharing that with someone else. So thank you for sharing that. Because for a moment, I was like, man, I know I say some things in my own sessions.
And you know what, Sharlee? And everybo's got their own style. So a couple, some couples are, somebody is more quiet and the other one is, this is kind of how I am. And their partners know. So I'm not suggesting that you have to be a mouse when you're in couples work, because you need to be able to say it from a very raw perspective, because that's what you're feeling. So it's walking that fine line between being able to express your feelings, especially if you've held a lot in.
Yeah.
And being able to not just decimate your partner.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because both are important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Something that you touched on, I want to go a little deeper into that. It being able to share the things that you may not have shared in conversations with them before takes a certain level of courage. How does the curiosity change the way couples approach those tough but necessary? You have to have the conversation. So how does curiosity change the way that couples speak to each other? And even, is there a set method to do it? Should you, like you mentioned, should you sit beside each other, look each other in the eye? Tell me more about how that is best achieved.
Depends on your state at the time you're having the conversation. So, what I encourage couples to have courageous or collaborative conversations. And that means that for the important things, the things that are tough to talk about, you definitely set a time, and you set a time when you're not hungry, you're not angry. And when you're really angry, yes, sometimes you need to express, but that's not a really good time to enter into a deep conversation. Now, that being said, sometimes an argument does lead ultimately to, a resolution. And in an ideal world, you set aside a time where you both calm and you designate who's going to be the listener and who's got something to say. And again, it's active listening. When you're the listener, you really need to listen from a perspective of wanting to understand, not defend your point of view. And that takes practice, because initially when we start talking, it's like, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say to you, or what you're doing that I feel is wrong, or what you need to hear my perspective. So it takes practice to really listen. Again, listen to understand, not to defend your position, and so they take turns. Once a particular, one person has something they want to talk about. So when they're finished, the other person asks questions or states what they've heard. What I think I heard you say was this, because as you probably know, as we all know, one person says this, you hear this, you respond to this, and before you know it, you're two totally different conversations.
Absolutely.
I've had people say that to me. Well, when she said that, I'm like, well, let me reflect back on what I heard the person say, because a lot of times it's very different. But again, that's related to the patterns in the past, because they're so used to someone responding or reacting in a certain way that they automatically assume they mean this or that, which can be very inaccurate. So it's really teaching people how to talk and listen to each other. And do they have to be face to face? I think to be face to face is nice because like I'm looking at you right now, even through the screen, and it's nice to face you. I mean, if we're side by side, we're not getting the same interaction as if we're looking at one another. So yeah, I think sit face to face, make sure you're both comfortable. You have a little water with you. And then, you make a commitment. I want to authentically share something that's been bothering me. And you start out with what John Gottman and Julie Gottman call a soft startup. You start out gently. And then you express what's going on. And the person says, this is what I heard you say. Did I get that right? And they say, not quite. I was also trying to say this, or I really want you to hear that this hurt me really badly. And I don't think you got that from the way you're expressing it. Okay. And then you continue until you get to the point where that person, there's almost like an audible sigh because you feel heard. Yeah. So often, and I don't know if you see this as well in male-female relationships, typically it's the man, but not always. What I hear is, oh my gosh, she says the same thing over and over. I got it the first time. But the reason we repeat ourselves and say it over and over is we don't think the other person got it. We don't feel like they really heard us. So it's learning how to listen better, let them know what you've heard so that they can feel heard. I say people want to, the 3 no's, you want to be known, noticed, and know you matter. And I think that all three of those are really critical in a relationship. We want someone to know us. We want them to notice us. We want them to say, oh, wow, I haven't seen you wear that dress before. Wow, you look hot today, or whatever it is. Or, you know what? I really appreciate the way you attack that problem. Doesn't always have to be about what you look like. And then we want to know you matter. We matter. I really love you. You're really important to me. I like the way you handled the kids in there. And those kinds of things, learning how to do those kinds of things help create a more intimate connection, which is part of what's possible as you do regular couples work. And especially it's critical after infidelity.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Whether you're a longtime or first-time listener to Behavioral Health Today, you're probably familiar with Triad, the company that brings you this podcast. But you may not know that Triad also hosts a community for current and aspiring behavioral and mental health professionals, featuring trending content and education and career resources, all for free. If you are a behavioral or mental health professional, or you're studying to become one, join more than 80,000 people on Triad by claiming your free professional account today. Visit us at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT and join the Triad community today.
Absolutely. So one thing that we spoke quite a bit about is male infidelity. Question is, are there differences when the female has committed the betrayal? Does the process work differently? Is there a different feeling around it, different themes that you use, different questions even?
There are similarities and there are absolute differences. Some of the differences are, I find that generally speaking, and again, everybody's individual, but men have a much tougher time working through female infidelity. And I think society helps set that up. We've got this idea, well, you know what? He's a man, boys will be boys. Not that we're accepting infidelity, but I think there is less judgment, even though there's a lot of judgment around infidelity. I think it's more expected of a guy. And I hate to even say that out loud, because I think it's a societal pressure, but when it's a woman, we tend to judge it much more harshly.
Yes.
And I think there are societal pressures that help exacerbate when it's done in the reverse, and I think part of that work is also helping. For both partners, it's helping you see that it doesn't diminish who you are as a man. It doesn't diminish who you are as a woman. But I think as you go into it, being the person working with them, your approach is a little bit different. Really have to take a look at somebody, how they view themselves in light of this and what's been going on for them. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a ton of sense because I completely agree with you because whether I agree with it or not, society does seem like the boys will be boys and they will,
Mhm,
men will do the things, that the world is set up. And so when
mhm.
it's the other way around, in my experience, the women that I know who have betrayed their spouses, it is a much, I won't say it's a bigger deal, but the men tend to not be able to work through it as easily. Of course, it's not easy, but they tend to not be able to work through it as easy as the women do, because it is not to say that we expect it as women, but to a certain extent, it is much more acceptable, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is true. And, women, generally speaking, tend to be more forgiving. They tend
Mhm.
to forgive a little more quickly, although there can be a lot of rage and anger in there. I'm not suggesting the forgiveness is easy, but they tend to forgive more easily. And it seems to be tougher for guys to work into that place of ever being able to forgive because that I there seems to be more competition with men. Men tend to be more competitive, like in the workplace, wanting to win. And again, not that women don't have those characteristics as well, but this whole idea as another man had my woman. That you're kind of competing with this other guy, like what's he got that I don't have? What's this? I
Mhm.
want to. I find that men want to figure out how to win in that scenario. And it's really hard. A lot of times they want to go after the other guy in whatever way possible. They have to figure out how to take their power back from the situation, which involved another man.
Gotcha. Yep. Agreed. So, for those that may currently be in the midst of a relationship challenge, what are some practical ways that they could use curiosity to shift from blame towards understanding? That is a difficult shift. And so, how does someone navigate that?
It is a difficult shift. And I think, again, it's taking a step back and having a willingness, talking about it with your partner and saying, okay, what can we do to create greater connection? Well, let me take a step back. Here's an example. Somebody has a new project at work. Okay. So we're taking it out of the realm of infidelity. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
your partner's working on this big project at work. When they come home and they're all drained and just frustrated, sit down with them and say, hey, oh, wow, I'd love to know a little bit about your project. Can you tell me more about it? Oh, okay. Wow. So it sounds like you put a lot of work into it and you really exhibit and genuinely feel that you're curious about what someone else is doing. You kind of think of it as, like you are with a child. When your teen comes home and they're working on something and while they created an art project or they've had their first time where they have to stand up and speak in front of the class, you talk to them about it. Do the same thing with your spouse. Start there. You know, if you're, if she's for her first time run a board meeting, ask her about it. And so that starts the process and it can become more natural, as opposed to, okay, you need to be curious, just start thinking about what they're doing and asking them questions, not interrogating questions like, well, why did you do it that way? And what's going, not accusatory questions, but really sit down and think of something that you're curious about. And that's a way to start, and then the more you start doing it, that can become more habitual where you naturally start, it's really showing an interest. And I think that, as we talked about before, people go on autopilot and they stop creating time for themselves, and as you start asking, showing an interest and being more curious, that can create greater intimacy. I tell people set aside at least one day a week where you sit down and you just say, okay, it's 7 o'clock on Thursday nights. We're going to spend 30 minutes, an hour together and just talk about our lives, and our lives are not just what's going on with the kids. For example, it's, tell me about something that you're interested in. If you're going to take a class in school, what would that be? If you were going to take up a new hobby, what would that look like? Or what's something that we could do together? Sometimes
Yeah.
being curious, what's kind of fun is to do something that neither one of you have never done together before, like take a cooking class or take a dance class or engage like that. That's another way It's about engagement and showing interest.
For some couples, there is someone that does not necessarily want to focus on anything other than what is wrong. And so trying to introduce situations that are new and different, but there is one that wants to stay stuck in whatever has happened to try to fix every problem, every situation right now. How, like, what do we say to the couple that they have different viewpoints on moving forward and healing? One wants to, let's hash out every problem we have, and the other one, all right, we have some stuff, but let's kind of focus on some positivity too. Where do they find the median there?
Well, that's great. Like these are other relationship questions. And typically there's one of each in a relationship. They'll say, she thinks the glass is half full. He thinks the glass is half empty, you know, whatever.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
think it's to realize, to give room to both. You know, people who tend to have a critical eye. I have a friend that says, well, I think, you know, people are critical and that allows them to notice things that can make the world better. You know, so that's one way of looking at that.
Yeah.
And I think it's to say, okay, let's take a look at some of the things we'd like to improve upon, you know, and again, this takes discipline and this takes conversation. But if we were to make our relationship better, what would we need to focus on? Well, you shouldn't need to do that and don't need, okay, well, what can we do instead? So it's taking that as a starting point, but not the ending point. I think that's a piece of it, you know? And saying we need both. Yeah, we need to take a look at the things that are going wrong, but also how can we reshape them and shift them? And what are some of the things that we're doing well? You know, I can't remember if I talked to Graham about this, but I have something called 3 things that I like couples to do at night before they go to bed. And I call that, you know, I call it 3 things because each one states 3 things that they're grateful for that day, and at least one needs to include your partner. And they can be little things. You know, so many times we think it's the big grandiose gestures that matter. And of course, those are nice, but it's like, you know, when I was walking down the street, I saw this little hummingbird, or I saw this really pretty flower, and that, you know, that lit up my world. I paid attention to it. Or I love the way when you walked in the door, you looked at me and you gave me kind of that, ooh, baby look, and it really lit up my world, you know? And
Absolutely.
those, because as you practice gratitude, you start to notice the things that you feel good about. So especially for someone who tends to be more negatively focused, that also is a way to help, because you can't hold 2 things in your mind at the same time, something you're mad about, something you're grateful for. So it's looking at ways you can shift just a little bit.
Nice. Nice. Thank you for that. And so congratulations again. You released your book last year. So are there new things coming with the book? How has that process been for you?
Well, it has been it's been a process. It takes much longer to write and to actually produce a book than I ever would have dreamed possible. If I would have known it would have taken that long, yeah, I don't know if I still hope I would have done it. But what I'm working on now is the next level. I'm actually recording it. And I found a great recording studio and they're working with me. And I like to read the book myself because I think there's emphasis that I want to put on it. So I've been working with them for months. Hopefully within the next month, we complete it. And then I will have an audiobook, which I think will be really helpful too. I find that if there's really a book that I'm into, I love to listen to it and have a copy of it so I can kind of, you know, underline things and take notes. But I think sometimes to just be able to hear, like when I'm walking or driving, is really helpful. And then I'm also working on creating a course around all of this too. So it just keeps going.
Nice. Nice. Very nice. I appreciate that you are evolving what you've already created and put your blood, sweat, and tears into and really taking it and creating more for our listeners and the readers out there. Because I agree, I need to hear it a few times and maybe even pause and record and be like, what did she say to me? So just even in the interview that you did previously with Graham, I definitely paused it while I was driving, thought about it and, you know, rewound it, played it again, you know, went back and forth over some of the topic areas. And so thank you for that. I appreciate
You know
it.
what,
I did it
Sharlee?
myself.
I love that. And I think that I listened to one of Brene Brown's books. It's The Atlas of the Heart, which I just loved. And I love the way she recorded her own book. I
Yes.
learned a lot about doing my own recording. Like she would even pause in her own book and say, you know what, in her little accent, I'm going to repeat that because I think it's really important. So I did that a couple of times too, trying to emulate her.
Because it makes it
with
seem
my
like
own
you were
style.
reading it to me. Like it's not
Right,
just
right,
you are
right.
recording your book. You are reading it to me personally.
Yes,
So
yes, that's what the goal is. We'll see. I'll send you a link when I get it up. I'd love to hear
Please
what you
do.
think about that. If I was
Please do.
successful at that.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. And so, as we wrap up today, I would really love for our listeners to be able to follow up with you. So, where can folks follow you, your work, and then once again, help our listeners know more about your book, The Infidelity Cure?
Okay. Well, I have two websites. One is drjeanniemichele.com, and I'm sure you'll put a link to it because I spell Jeannie and Michelle differently. And then the infidelitycure.com. And then I also have a download for women. It's called healingfromtheaffair.com/women. And it gives them, a resource to go in and do some things and take a look at how they can best heal.
Awesome. Awesome. And I know that our listeners are going to love that. And I appreciate you again for addressing how that feels to be the betrayer and from both sides, how that works for everyone involved. And Jeannie, I really have appreciated speaking with you today.
You know what? I love you. We have to do this again. You have such a great style. You're so authentic and honest, and you're fun. You're fun. You make
Thank
doing this a lot of fun. So I appreciate
Thank you,
that.
ma'am. I have enjoyed myself with you today. Thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. Make sure you follow us on our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and even on YouTube at Behavioral Health Today. And if you like our show, give us 5 stars and leave us a review. That helps our show get discovered and share the valuable insights in each episode. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.